Hi class, my name is Andrew Christensen. This is my Chapter 10 assignment, researching ability grouping and whether or not it's beneficial for all students to be successful in the classroom academically. Based on my research, the biggest thing that I realized is that there's not a lot of concrete research and information to tell us whether or not it is 100% one way or the other, whether it's something that's beneficial to all students and can be successful in the classroom, or whether it is something that we should not be using, that is ineffective and that does not benefit all the students in the classroom and all the students individually, equally, academically. Going through the research in various online resources, case studies, and different peer-reviewed articles, as I said, there were a lot of pros, cons, advantages, disadvantages, a lot of arguments one way or the other, but at the end of the day there seemed to be something in common, and that was if ability grouping is done correctly and implemented correctly in the classroom, it can be effective. It can be beneficial for our students to learn. It can be beneficial for our students to achieve academic success by labeling them into groups and working at their own pace. And there were obviously some disadvantages and arguments on the other side, but again, one thing I did seem to find is that there was always some type of consistency with the advantages if it's implemented correctly. So if I was presenting to the administration, or an administrator myself presenting to teachers, I would promote ability grouping to a point as a teaching strategy in the classroom. Obviously things change whether we're talking primary education, junior high education, or at the secondary level, but I think that there is a benefit to ability grouping in some capacity at all three levels, and it's something that could be used effectively. From my standpoint as an administrator, I think the biggest thing would be how to train the staff adequately so that our students would benefit from ability grouping and we wouldn't see so many of the disadvantages. And so that would be probably the biggest challenge. How do we train our staff? What workshops can we go to? How can we instill that ourselves in our own district, in our building, for our students to be successful academically? And so with my paper, I really touched on the advantages and the disadvantages of ability grouping, analyzed the information, and then kind of compiled my own thought process and what I would do as an administrator or how I would present it. And so just some of the pros and the advantages that I found throughout my research was that students can move at their own pace, whether it's a high achieving ability, middle achieving ability, or lower level achieving ability. Students can move at their own pace, and so they're comfortable, and the information that they're obtaining is adequate to their own ability, and so they are able to push at their own pace. For example, high ability learnings would be able to work a little bit more independently. They would be able to have tasks that were a little bit more challenging so that they didn't get bored and stagnant with the lessons. Another one, encouraging collaborative work with labeling and putting students into certain and specific groups. It can help students be more comfortable with other students in their group to work together collaboratively in the lesson, the unit, whatever it might be, so there can be more comfort with students in their ability group to work together. Students can be challenged, like I just said with the higher ability learnings. It's another opportunity for them to work a little bit more independently, push themselves beyond what the other students are learning at that time, and be challenged throughout. And that goes for the middle group and the lower group. They're able to push themselves and challenge themselves at their own level. Students work at their own level and ability. This creates, again, comfort and a sense of assurance that they are working at a level that's comfortable, yet they'll continue to learn and push through. increased student achievement. This goes for the lower and higher pace that we had talked about with the first advantage. If things are implemented correctly, there were studies that showed that there is how do I want to say this? There are studies that show that there are advantages that students do increase achievement through ability grouping, and this has a lot to do with the pace that they're at. And individual attention and instruction, this allows teachers to give more individual attention to the ability group that they're working with. They're allowed to give the higher ability and higher achieving groups independent study at times, and they can go on their own, and that can afford them time to work with the middle and lower achieving groups, give them more individual instruction, and this can obviously be an advantage to the students that need more of that individual instruction. So there are a lot of advantages. Those are some of the key points that I touched on throughout my paper and the research that I had got through my resources. And so I do think that there are some great things that come from ability grouping, putting kids into a certain achievement group and letting them work at their own pace. Moving on, there were obviously some disadvantages in the research as well. So some of the cons would be labeling. This can create anxiety and discomfort for some students to be labeled into a group. Oftentimes when they're labeled in that group, they stay in that group and that becomes comfortable, so it's harder to challenge them to create and close that gap in between those ability groups. Improper grouping, if it's not implemented correctly, students may be put in a situation where they're in an incorrect group. If they're in a lower group than they should be, they can get comfortable and satisfied with that, and so it's harder to bridge that gap. Students only work to their level. Again, students may not feel challenged. They may get stagnant and satisfied with where they're at, and so they only work to the ability group that they're at rather than changing and challenging themselves to push through with that academic gap. Criteria based to the criteria is based to group kids on. It's very subjective at times. I'm sorry. So the criteria that we used in some of our classes is very subjective. It's just something that we see, and there's no actual data to prove what level of group that they should be in. And teacher expectations can be a con as well. There are times that a teacher can have expectations and treat students of one group as superior and another group as inferior, and obviously that will create problems within a classroom, and that's something that we never want to do with our students. We always want to be equal to each one of our students. We want to teach them individual instruction and give them what's best, but we always want to keep them on an equal playing field, and so we don't want any superior and inferior groups. We certainly don't want them feeling like that, and oftentimes that can happen, and teachers don't even understand that it is happening or realize that it is. So those are some of the advantages and disadvantages to the research that I was putting into my paper and researching throughout the last week. Again, if I was a principal, I would promote ability grouping, but there would have to be some type of training and workshops that would go into it to provide the staff adequate instruction so that they would be able to implement ability grouping correctly in the classroom, whether it be primary, junior high, or high school levels. And that's it. So if you have any questions, please let me know, and have a great day.